This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Persistent reports that hostage negotiator Terry Wade is himself a hostage are prompting grave concern among his family back home in Britain. Good morning, I'm Patrick Greenlaw in Atlanta. We'll have the latest on the hostage situation in Beirut shortly. First, some good news from down under. For the skipper of the American yacht Stars and Stripes, it's one wind down and 3 to go before bringing the America's Cup back to the United States. In the first race for the Cup in Fremantle, Australia, Dennis Conner and his crew sailed to an easy win over Australian boat Kookaburra 3. The Aussie yacht was expected to handle better in light winds, but Conner's ship raced to an easy 1 minute, 41-second win.
Well, I guess there's some sort of feeling of disappointment. We would have liked to have won the race, but as it turned out, we didn't, and we didn't even come close.
This is just one race, and there's a lot of racing left to go, and we just feel fortunate to come out of this with a win. It could have gone either way. I'm sure if Ian had taken over the helm of the Cougars at the start in the same situation that we were, that they would have won the race.
And the next race is scheduled for tomorrow. Philippines President Corazon Aquino vows to defy any further attempts to destabilize her government. Aquino made that pledge before a rally in Manila in support of her new draft constitution. She urged the 100,000-plus crowd that gathered to vote yes for the Constitution in Monday's plebiscite. Aquino also had words of praise for her military leaders for crushing a recent coup attempt by dissident government troops. The Church of England is making new pleas for information about its envoy, Terry Wade. The hostage negotiator has not been seen since January 20th in Beirut, where he was trying to win the release of American captives. There are mixed reports over whether he has become a hostage himself or will reappear in the next few days. Meanwhile, 3 Americans are heeding a U.S. order to leave Lebanon. 2 men and a woman were taken under heavy guard today from Muslim West Beirut to the U.S. Embassy in Christian East Beirut. U.S. officials say all Americans are in danger of being kidnapped in Lebanon. For the 3rd weekend in a row, black civil rights activists will be in Forsyth County, Georgia, to press their demands for racial equality. Tomorrow, members of the group will attend church services in the county. CNN's Jeff Offgang has this look at what has happened in Forsyth County in the last week.
March organizers were back in the county seat of Cumming Friday. They delivered a list of demands aimed at bringing racial justice to a place where blacks have not lived for 75 years.
To begin to work on blacks being able to live in the county, blacks being able to be employed, blacks being able to participate in the government.
But one official who was in Cumming last week, U.S. Senator Sam Nunn, says there's no comparison between the days of legal segregation and the situation in Forsyth today. In a speech to Forsyth's Chamber of Commerce Friday night, Nunn praised civic leaders for welcoming the marchers to their county.
But this is not a return to the 1960s. The situation is much different here in Cumming, Georgia than it was in Selma or Montgomery or St. Augustine. In the 60s, we were marching against state-sponsored racism. Here, we are joined by our senators and protected by our governor.
March coordinator Reverend Hosea Williams said his reception from community leaders Friday was very cordial. Among his demands are efforts to improve economic and housing opportunities for blacks, education programs to improve race relations, and most controversial of all, compensation for families of blacks driven out of Forsyth County in 1912. And that didn't set well.
I really personally feel that it's inappropriate for anyone to come along to try to force someone today to fulfill something that may have happened 75 years ago.
Crow said last week's march had only worsened race relations in Forsyth County, and residents are angry at being singled out for adverse national attention.
We're not a community of hatred, racism, and we intend to uphold the laws of the Constitution for everyone, regardless of whether black or white.
A week later, it could be even more difficult for blacks to enter Forsyth County. An out-of-county high school refused to play 2 scheduled basketball games Friday. Some of its black players said they were afraid to show up. Jeff Offgang, CNN, reporting.
So, you've got the wife's family informatic.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
The Stars and Stripes sails to victory over Australia in the first leg of the America's Cup today. Good morning, I'm Patrick Greenlaw. More on that story in just a moment, but first, our top story at this hour. An awful ring of truth. That's the way a cousin of hostage negotiator Terry Wade is describing reports that Wade is also being held captive. The Anglican Church envoy has not been seen since January 20th in Beirut. He had been working to win the release of 2 American hostages. Diplomatic sources and published reports say Wade is being held by factions of a radical Muslim group. But another report says he will reappear this weekend. Meanwhile, the British Broadcasting Corporation says Wade delivered a $2 million ransom last year for American hostage David Jacobson. The report quotes a PLO official as saying the money was raised by American corporations. In Washington, the State Department repeated U.S. policy against paying ransom for hostages. The longest strike in American steel industry history may soon be over. The United Steelworkers Union is counting ballots today on whether to accept the proposed concessions contract. The pact is expected to be approved. 22,000 workers began the work stoppage 6 months ago. The trains are running again along the Long Island Railroad. Striking workers are going back to work as part of a presidential order for a 60-day cooling-off period. The strike against the nation's largest commuter rail system lasted 11 days. A Continental airliner ran off a runway in Boston last night, and a Pacific Southwest jet had to abort takeoff in Sacramento. No one was injured in the 2 mishaps, but Boston's Logan International Airport had to be closed for more than 2 hours. Boston authorities say the Continental DC-9 was preparing to take off for Washington when it slid off the runway. In Sacramento, an engine failed on a DC-9 as it was taking off for San Diego. The pilot aborted the takeoff before the plane left the ground. 3 new airlines have joined the battle over airfares launched by Eastern and Continental's cut-rate prices. American Airlines, Pan Am, and U.S. Air announced yesterday they are slashing their fares by up to 80%. CNN's Jeff Flock has more on the airfares war raging among the nation's airlines.
The war is lighting up travel agents' computer screens all across the country.
Let's check the 20th of April. The response has been crazy. The phones have not stopped ringing since this morning.
At Ask Mr. Foster Travel in Chicago, Agent Christy Behringer couldn't get through to Continental to book flights. Calls to the reservation number jammed the circuits.
All circuits are busy now.
The discount fares announced Thursday by Continental and Eastern hit the Friday morning papers and made the term Super Saver obsolete. Max Saver is now the new code word for ultimate discounts.
This gives an added incentive.
I live in New York, and it's cheaper to fly to New Mexico and go skiing than it is to drive up to Vermont.
Instead of having to stay in the neighboring state, may go over 5-6 states. That's one of the nice things about deregulation.
The competition isn't so sure. Fare wars overshadowed an Atlanta press conference announcing that Delta will be the new official airline of Walt Disney World.
We're looking at what they've done, yes. We will be offering competitive fares on a selective basis.
American announced its own super-duper low fares, similar to Eastern's and Continental's. United says it will follow suit. But what is good news for passengers is bad news for the companies. Airline stock didn't do well for the second day in a row. Texas Air, which owns Eastern and Continental, recovered from a plunge Thursday. American and Delta were both down, and United was up only after announcing that more than 1,000 employees, mostly management at its Elk Grove Village, Illinois headquarters, would be fired to cut costs. United, which used to be the nation's biggest airline until Texas Air bought Continental and Eastern, says the firings are a direct result of having to cut costs because of earlier fare battles. Analysts say that demonstrates that cutting fares is a bold but risky strategy. They say Texas Air ought to be ready to pay the consequences. I'm Jeff Flock, CNN, in Chicago.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Good morning, I'm Patrick Greenlaw. Here are the stories we're following for you this hour. The Reverend Robert Runcie, Archbishop of the Canterbury, is pleading with Lebanese officials for information about his personal envoy, Terry Wade. Wade has not been seen since he left his hotel in Beirut January 20th. He was there to negotiate the release of foreign hostages. Meanwhile, in London, relatives of Waite say they are shattered by reports that he has been taken hostage. Some Middle East publications are reporting Waite is under house arrest, but other Middle Eastern sources say Waite is safe and will reappear in Beirut sometime this weekend. Runcie sent urgent messages to Lebanon today requesting information on Waite's whereabouts. 3 Americans were evacuated from Muslim West Beirut today under tight security. Witnesses say Muslim Druze militiamen escorted the 3 from their homes to the abandoned U.S. Embassy in West Beirut. They were later handed over to Lebanese police at the Green Line separating Christian East Beirut from the Muslim West. Militiamen guarding the embassy annex kept reporters away as a 5-car convoy of Druze militiamen took the Americans to the Green Line. A 5-year-old girl is dead after trying to rescue her 2 older brothers who had fallen through the frozen Chicago River. The little girl, Victoria Wakeup, managed to pull one of her brothers out of the icy river, but she fell in herself when she tried to save her other brother. Rick Rosenthal was there during the rescue workers' harrowing search for the children.
Fire department divers began their hunt shortly after they got the emergency call. 5-year-old Victoria Wakub and her brothers, 8-year-old Jonathan and 9-year-old Mohammed, had been playing on the ice.
The 8-year-old boy slipped in and fell in. And the brother and the sister helped pull them out of the ice flow. And the other brother fell in again and was submerged in the water. And the sister went back to retrieve the 8-year-old boy's gloves, and she fell in. The 8-year-old boy was already out and he was wet and he ran for help.
Emergency teams searched frantically for 8-year-old Jonathan's brother and sister, but at first were not even sure where to look. So Jonathan was brought back to point out just where they'd fallen in. The search continued, but against long odds.
The difficulty is that current. See, we can't get down and stay on the bottom. And as soon as we get down, the current takes us out. And there's so much debris and no visibility that you can't, it's strictly by feel now. So the rescue efforts are really hard.
Divers hacked and sawed their way through the ice, hoping to get back down to the area where they believed the remaining 2 children would be. Simply by groping in the icy water, they'd found one of the 2 children, the little girl, Victoria. She was rushed to Swedish Covenant Hospital. Divers pressed their search for the last missing child, 9-year-old Mohammed Wakub, convinced the current would keep him in the immediate search area.
Victoria Wakeup was pronounced dead at the hospital. The search continues for her 10-year-old brother, but he is also presumed dead. Stay tuned. Coming up, we'll tell you about plans by civil rights leaders to return tomorrow to all-white Forsyth County, Georgia. And we'll tell you about a race halfway around the world that made many Americans very proud.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Despite car bombings and hostage-taking, a group of American missionaries wants to stay in Lebanon. But first, the State Department must give the go-ahead. Hello, I'm Patrick Greenlaw. We'll have more on the clergy who want to stay in Lebanon in just a few minutes. But first, the man who's been working hard to get some Americans out of Lebanon, Terry Waite. The family of the hostage negotiator, Terry Waite, says it now fears reports he has been kidnapped may be true. The Anglican Church envoy has not been seen in almost 2 weeks. He was in Beirut on another mission to try to win the release of foreign captives. The Archbishop of Canterbury, Robert Runcie, issued new pleas today for more information about Waite's whereabouts. Diplomatic sources in Washington and published reports in Lebanon say he is caught in a struggle between 2 rival Muslim factions. But another report says he's expected to reappear this weekend. Waite's last trip to Beirut coincided with the release of American hostage David Jacobson. Now, an unconfirmed report says Waite delivered a $2 million ransom to Jacobson's kidnappers. The British Broadcasting Corporation quotes a PLO official as saying the money came from American companies. In Washington, a State Department spokesman repeated standing U.S. policy against paying ransom for hostages or encouraging others to pay ransom. The State Department also is asking Iran for assurances that the fate of American hostages is not being linked to the return of Iranian assets now frozen in the United States. The department made the request in a letter to the U.S.-Iran Claims Tribunal meeting in The Hague, Netherlands. The panel is trying to work out a settlement for the $500 million in Iranian assets the U.S. has been holding since 1979. The growing threat of being kidnapped in Beirut is prompting the U.S. to order all Americans out of that country. 3 Americans were evacuated from the war-torn capital today. CNN's John Donvan has more in this live report from Larnaca, Cyprus. John, good evening.
Good evening, Patrick. We haven't actually seen those Americans who crossed from West Beirut to East Beirut. As far as we know, they're still in the city. And apparently they got out with the involvement of the American embassy, and they also came out under armed escort, escorted by Druze militiamen. We're told that some of the Americans there are finding it very difficult to make the decision to leave, and that originally that group of 3 was a group of 5, but 2 of the women at the last moment changed their minds, one of them breaking into tears saying that she couldn't leave and she stayed behind. We've also seen here in the port of Larnaca, Cyprus, which is where we're based now, a ferry boat come in early this morning here bringing 17 Americans. Many of them, again, have very mixed feelings about leaving, saying that they wish that peace would return there and were hoping to hold out for that, but they feel that as Americans they have to obey the order to leave. Some of them, in fact, quite critical of the American policy, some even more critical of the U.S. Embassy in Beirut, which they say is not giving Americans there the kind of help that they think that they should be getting if they want to stay or if they want to leave. One woman said she phoned up saying she wanted to leave, and an official at the embassy said to her, it's not my business to help you, it's my business to tell you to get out of here. Patrick?
John, from your discussions with some of those who have left, have you any idea what the mood is like in Beirut right now?
I think it depends very much on which part of the city you're in. All of the people we met today are from the eastern side, which you could say with some justification is the calmer, less dangerous side, and all of them say that when the explosions are not on your block, then basically you don't have any feeling that anything dangerous is going on. They describe on their side of town life is normal, but they're very conscious that in other parts of the town it could be extremely dangerous, and they think that Americans probably should be getting out of those parts of town.
Okay, John Donvan reporting live from Larnaca, Cyprus, and of course he'll be on top of this story and we'll have further details as soon as they become available. Now, among the Americans being told to leave Lebanon are a number of religious missionaries, but a Baptist group is hoping to be exempted from that order. Charles Murphy has more.
Christian East Beirut is not immune from the chaos that has made Beirut a synonym for terror. But Richmond-based Baptist missionaries say they don't want to abandon this city, even though the State Department says it's time for Americans to get out.
They've suffered in Lebanon. They have been threatened with all the recent events, and yet they have chosen to stay. And they have identified with the people of Lebanon, and they would like to continue to remain.
For security reasons, Bellinger won't say how many missionaries the Foreign Missions Board has in Beirut, but he hopes some will qualify as humanitarian workers, a category exempted from the State Department's quit order.
We are seeking a clarification of the ruling to determine if some exceptions could be made and if some of our personnel could indeed remain in Lebanon.
If the State Department says the missionaries must come home, the Missions Board says it will expect them to comply with the order. But if some of the missionaries refuse to return, the Missions Board here in Richmond will find itself faced with a painful decision, whether to cut off support or defy the government by continuing to fund missionary activities in Beirut. Charles Murphy, CNN, Richmond.
Philippines government troops took 5 dissident army members into custody today. They're suspected of taking part in this week's failed coup attempt. They were captured during a raid on a farm outside Manila after the army received a tip 50 to 300 rebels would be there. But a spokesman for the military says most of the rebels ignored leaflets dropped from a helicopter and fled before they could be captured. Meanwhile, President Corazon Aquino stepped up last-minute campaigning for a new constitution. She told a crowd of about 170,000 people the Constitution can unite the country's moderate forces against the extremists on the right and the left. Filipinos will vote on whether to adopt the Constitution on Monday. Former Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos says he may not make his planned trip to the Philippines now because of an eye ailment. Marcos had vowed to go back despite warnings he would be violating U.S. law. His doctors have advised him not to fly. As CNN's Ann McDermott reports, Marcos has been in the news more than ever recently.
Wednesday night, Thursday night, Friday night, Ferdinand Marcos gave interviews, appearing to take on the role of elder statesman in predicting defeat for the vote on the Philippine Constitution.
They will only win a yes vote if they engage in massive cheating.
Critics of the deposed president see this new media barrage as Marcos's latest attempt to stir up rebellion in his homeland. Marcos has denied any involvement. There is no denying his interest in speaking out, though. In recent weeks, he's made appearances on several news programs, including CNN's Crossfire. But a representative of the Aquino government in Honolulu doesn't think it's going to work.
In a way, I guess he's playing a psychological warfare also to keep up hopes in the Philippines, which is, of course, I guess, stupidly vain on his part.
Certainly, this is a different Marcos from the man who arrived in Hawaii nearly a year ago. Back then, comments from the exile were rare. But this week, besides holding interviews with all the American networks, Marcos went international, granting interviews to Canadian and Australian TV. He again talked of his hopes to return to the Philippines and mentioned a shadowy approach by someone in his homeland who might help him realize that goal.
Probably speculative right now. I do not want to give it too much importance.
Marcos did speak out about his various health problems, including a lingering case of the flu he blames on excess exercise. Some residents of Hawaii, meanwhile, are getting a little tired of all the Marcos media attention.
I think it's kind of hyped up. It's kind of ridiculous.
As for Marcos, he says he's speaking out now to keep the Aquino government from making errors, such as dealing with the communists. Some Philippine officials say they wish Marcos would just shut up. That seems unlikely, but these same officials believe if the Philippine Constitution is approved, at least fewer people will be listening to him. Ann McDermott, CNN, Honolulu.
We have a new development in the Terry Waite story out of Beirut, Lebanon right now. I'm going to read it off the computer terminal right here. It just came in out of the Associated Press. Lebanese Druze leader Walid Jumblat is today quoted as saying he has offered to turn himself over as a hostage to replace Anglican Church envoy Terry Waite if reports of Waite's abduction are true. Now, several privately owned Beirut radio stations quote Jumblat as saying he made the offer to a political faction that he did not name, and he said that Jumblat is telling the faction, quote, "Do not embarrass me. Take me hostage if you want, but I want to take delivery of Terry Waite," and there is no word on what the response was given. Now, the Druze leader had been in charge of Waite security before he was last seen on January 20th. Jumblat said he was not sure anymore that the recent guarantees he had given to the Archbishop of Canterbury about the safety of his emissary still stand. That's what he told the Archbishop of Canterbury. Now, there have been a flurry of reports, as we've been telling you, that Terry Waite has been taken hostage by kidnappers he was negotiating with while trying to free foreign hostages. But again, none of those reports have been confirmed up to now. And of course, we'll have further details on this story as soon as they become available, and we'll be back with more news right after this.
It's 5 below, but for me it's 101.
This is CNN, a service of Turner Broadcasting System.
Another ominous report from Lebanon today as the leader of the group assigned to protect hostage negotiator Terry Waite says he can no longer guarantee Waite's safety. Hello, I'm Steve Schatz, and here is the latest from CNN. An international drama continues to unfold in Beirut. While many people try to determine if hostage negotiator Terry Waite is still in the war-torn city, many Americans are trying to get out. We begin with the evacuations and CNN's John Donvan in Larnaca, Cyprus.
The first Americans obeying the order to leave Lebanon arrived among other passengers by boat in Cyprus on Saturday, most of them with mixed feelings about leaving, some of them sharply critical of the U.S. Embassy in Beirut. This couple, an American wife and a Lebanese husband, told how she got no help when telephoning the embassy to say she was leaving.
And when she told him that, well, I'm leaving, would you please help me? He said, I'm not here to help you, I'm here just to tell you to get the hell out of Lebanon. He said, well, I mean, the American embassy is supposed to serve the Americans in Lebanon. He said, no, I'm not here to serve you, lady. I mean, I don't know. He was really sarcastic to her.
This woman, leaving for California with 3 sons, was asked what advice she would give the nearly 1,500 U.S. passport holders still in Lebanon. She answered, don't go to the U.S. Embassy. But among this group of Americans, none of whom came from the more dangerous west side of Beirut, there was a consensus that as U.S. citizens, they had to obey the order to leave and that evacuation was probably wise. This woman was friends with one of the Americans kidnapped last weekend.
I think foreigners who have hung on this long in West Beirut are coming to the conclusion that it may be time to get out.
But in West Beirut on Saturday, the embassy was responsible for getting a small group of Americans safely out of their homes and into the east side of Beirut. The embassy arranged for an escort of Druze militiamen to drive the Americans out. But at least one woman, due to join that group, changed her mind at the last moment, broke into tears, and decided to stay. Here in Cyprus, where newsmen keep tuned to Lebanese radio around the clock, there is still no firm word on the whereabouts of Anglican envoy Terry Waite. Beirut media reports still contradict one another, one encouraging hope for Waite, others saying he is now a kidnap victim himself. This piece of runway here in Larnaca, Cyprus is probably one of the most closely watched stretches of blacktop anywhere just now. It's where Terry Waite and any American hostages will probably touch down on the day they finally come out of Lebanon. Although in the case of Waite, fears are growing that that day is getting further off. John Donvan, CNN, Larnaca, Cyprus.
And the search for Waite has taken another new twist today. Druze Muslim leader Wali Jumblat is offering himself as a hostage in exchange for the Anglican envoy. It was Jumblat's militia that had acted as guards for Waite before he disappeared almost 2 weeks ago. Jumblat says he can no longer guarantee Waite's safety, but he would not elaborate on why. Those guarantees were made to Waite's sponsor, Archbishop of Canterbury Robert Runcie. Today, Runcie again pleaded for information and prayers on Waite's behalf. A church spokeswoman says there are now so many rumors about Waite, the church will no longer comment on them. There is also an unconfirmed report that Waite delivered ransom money on an earlier mission. The British Broadcasting Corporation says Waite handed over $2 million last fall for the release of American hostage David Jacobson. A PLO official is quoted as saying the money came from American companies. And at least one group of Americans wants to stay in Lebanon despite the danger. Missionaries from the Southern Baptist Church in the U.S. say they want to remain to continue their work. Most are stationed in Christian East Beirut.
They suffered in Lebanon. They have been threatened with all the recent events, and yet they have chosen to stay. And they have identified with the people of Lebanon, and they would like to continue to remain.
Now, newspapers in Beirut today published a U.S. government statement warning Americans to leave Lebanon or face prosecution. But Ballinger says the missionaries will likely apply for a special exemption from the State Department that would permit them to stay. The Philippines government today cornered some 200 rebel troops at a farm owned by a son-in-law of deposed President Ferdinand Marcos. The dissident soldiers were involved in an aborted coup earlier this week. Military officials say most of the rebels escaped after a brief exchange of gunfire. The government did seize rifles, machine guns, and thousands of rounds of ammunition. In the meantime, President Corazon Aquino ended campaigning today to seek approval for a new constitution. She told a rally the military will defy further attempts to destabilize her government. Philippine citizens vote on the draft constitution on Monday. Fierce fighting continued today in the Iran-Iraq war. Iran claimed it gained new territory in southern Iraq, but the Iraqi news agency says Baghdad television began broadcasting an hour early to report on new victories by the Iraqi army. Iran has poured hundreds of thousands of soldiers into its 6.5-year war with Iraq, but as Brent Sadler reports from Tehran, the Iranian people still appear to support that war effort.
Looks a city at peace, its postcard setting the mask for a nation that is slowly destroying itself at the same time as its enemy. Inside the capital, the pain of war is all too evident. These mourners grieving for men and boys who've fallen in a war that is paid for in blood. After each battle, thousands of Iranians bury their dead at the Behet Zera cemetery on the outskirts of Tehran. This old man was a soldier. Age is no barrier in their holy war. The young learn that they too must be prepared to fight and die. Soldiers are not killed in battle, they're martyred in the eyes of Iranians, and they deserve a special place in heaven.